All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this entry into the Local and Family History lecture series. Thank you all for joining us. I know we're a little earlier than we usually are, but our guest speaker is in England, so that's why we're starting at noon today instead of at 6 o'clock like we usually do. So just a couple things before we get going. We acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning, deliberations, and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect, found in our motto, free to all. This program is being recorded, so if you miss anything, you don't need to worry. You will get a link to the recording once it's been uploaded, which will hopefully be soon. You'll also be getting a follow-up email from me tomorrow. If there's any links that were shared in the chat, you will get them there again. The chat is active, by the way, so if you want to say hello and tell us where you're joining us from, go right ahead. So let me see. Yeah. All right, so our speaker today, joining us from England, is Clotilda Yap. She has assisted families from around the world in tracing their Chinese family history since joining My China Roots in 2017. As the head of global collections for My China Roots, she researches untapped archives of Chinese communities across the globe, partnering with libraries, museums, and community organizations to preserve their collections for posterity. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Clotilde.
Thanks, Jessie. It's great to be back speaking with the Boston Public Library. I'm very excited to be here today. It's the first time that East Coast Library has subscribed to our database. So yeah, what I'll do today is give you a little introduction to My China Roots, who we are as an organization. We've been around for more than 10 years. I'll talk to you a bit about the database and why we decided to build a database, but also what you can get from it. I'll show you how you can access it via the Boston Public Library. And then finally, we'll talk through some challenges that we or members of the audience might be facing where you are at in your Chinese family history research. And then I'll show you how to use the database, and I'll show you a few tips to make the most of it. Okay, so just checking on the chat to see where people are coming from. Great, we've got people from not just Boston, from all over. Welcome, everybody. Okay, so a little bit about My China Roots then. Our mission has always been to try and help people feel more connected to their Chinese heritage. And when we first started the company in 2012, this was mostly through bespoke research. So we actually have a team that is based out in China that is available for hire, basically, if you want to do a roots trip, or if you have an old family heirloom or family book, or old documents that you need translated, or you want to reconnect with distant family members back in China. This is a service that we've been providing for 12 years now. We have a team of native Chinese genealogy researchers who travel to people's ancestral villages to take pictures, conduct oral history interviews, and just gather information about people's family history. So we've been doing this for families that are all over the world, not just in the US. We have customers who come from Europe and Australia and Southeast Asia. So I'm based in the UK. I'm actually the only team member who is based in the UK, but our team itself is spread across China, Europe. My colleague who designed a lot of the beautiful graphics, you'll see my presentation, she's based in Oakland. My boss is in Paris, and yeah, we have team members kind of scattered around the globe. I have Chinese heritage on my father's side, so even though I was born and raised in the UK, my dad is Chinese Malaysian, so he was born and raised in Malaysia, and his ancestors came from China. So a lot of our team members have similar experiences of growing up far from China, but being really intrigued and interested in our own family history. Our founder is technically Dutch, but his ancestry is Indonesian Chinese. So we've all kind of experienced this feeling of disconnect from our own roots and are really passionate about helping other people just discover more about themselves through family history. And a few years back, we launched the My China Roots database, which is the first specialist genealogy platform for people of Chinese heritage. So we have two main groups of records that are available for searching via the database. One batch is mostly English-speaking records. It has some Chinese, but is mostly in English. So 2.5 million searchable records in English that are from North America, mostly North America, US and Canada, but also from Singapore, the Caribbean, and we have a few collections from Southeast Asia also. And we have another big collection of Chinese family tree books. Some of you may have heard of these books before. They are clan genealogies that are compiled. They come from mainland China, so they would usually have been compiled by families, and they're incredibly rich documents. They can contain thousands of names. So we have over 200 million searchable names in this collection alone. But this collection is only searchable in Chinese. Having said that, our whole database was designed for people who do not read or write Chinese. So I'll show you in the second part of my talk, when I do the demo, what kind of tools we have in place for people who don't know how to navigate Chinese. So how do you access the database through the Boston Public Library? If you navigate to the online resources section of the website, there's a section on local history, biography, and genealogy. And actually, we're still highlighted on the homepage, which is very nice. So you can just access that link here. You need to have a Boston Public Library card to access the database. The other way is if you are on site at the library, you can just visit mychinarootslibrary.com and you will automatically be granted access normally. We are also available at a few other public libraries, mostly in California, but also, mostly in California. And we're also available at a handful of academic institutions too. If you are not in Boston and you don't see your library here, please do drop me a message or visit mychinarootslibrary.com. There should be an email address that you can connect with. Yeah, because then it's just a question of me reaching out to that library and saying, hey, we would love to offer access to the My China Roots database in your local branches. And then that way you can basically get free access to this resource, which brings me on to my next slide. So our database is available, of course, via libraries, but we also have a personal account that is available, a personal subscription. We call it the detective membership. So the difference between the two is, well, you get free access via your library. With a personal account, you pay $90 a year, but you have the ability to build your own family tree, and our database will, and our software will do all of the hard work for you. Essentially, you don't have to actually search. You can just wait to receive notifications when we do find a match between your tree and our database. So you do not get access to the family tree and hints through a library subscription. Because it's, as of today, it is officially API Heritage Month, we have a special discount on for anyone who want to subscribe to get their own account. So you get 10% off if you use the code here. It'll be valid throughout this month, but not afterwards. So the code is BPL24. Okay, so now I can talk about how you can actually search and a few things to keep in mind before you start searching. Before I begin, I just wanted to check in with everyone and just ask if you are happy to share in the chat where you are at in your search. If there's anything in particular you are hoping to learn, I'll just wait for a minute or so to gather your comments, and then I can maybe weave some answers into my presentation. but yeah, mostly I would love to know what kind of challenges you might be facing. Oh, hi, Stephen, joining from the UK. I didn't think there'd be anyone from the UK today. That's always nice. Okay, great. I will also drop in my email address for those who might be interested in getting a library subscription local to them if they're not at the Boston Public Library. Okay, so we have a question. Tiff Ting writes, she hasn't had much luck with her last name. Okay, Eric writes he was able to find his great-grandfather and family book using our website. Amazing, Eric. I'm so glad to hear it. I would love to hear more about this a bit later when I talk about family books. Benjamin writes he has added dead end for his Chinese Jamaican searches, great-grandfather. Okay, we do have some Chinese Jamaican resources that I can show you a bit later. And Julia, you write about you asked whether the source is for children who are adopted from China. So perhaps I can start by saying this. The database that we created through My China Roots is primarily for people who whose ancestors left China between the 1850s and 1960s. So usually the people who will use our service are second or third or even fourth generation Chinese. So unfortunately, the database is not designed for adoptees. Having said that, I do really suggest you contact our research team if you are interested in conducting research. We specialize in adoptee-related research. I don't know if you watched the Netflix documentary Found, but we basically helped the main researcher in this documentary was a My China Roots researcher. And so let me actually just show you where you can find this information on the website. So this is the My China Roots website, but we do have our main website. If you go to mychinaroots.com/services, you will see that we have different types of offerings. Aside from standardized ancestry research, we also offer adoption research. So do visit our website and reach out if you want to just have a chat with our team. It's completely non-committal. You can just see what's possible based on the information that you have. Okay. I saw a few other comments that were about, oh, hi, Caro. Oh, it's so nice when friends join the chat. I saw there was another comment about also adoption. Jeannie writes her father was formerly adopted. And I saw a few comments that were from people who were saying they were having difficulty with reading Chinese. So I've just listed here a few very typical questions or brick walls that people when they come to us, these are the things that they complain about, or that it's their sticking points, really. So definitely the language barrier is a big one. A lot of folks feel like because they don't read or write Chinese, they can't have access to certain records. They assume that there are no records that are available, or their ancestor was perhaps arrived during the exclusion period, and they're not sure if they were a paper son or not. This is a very frequent occurrence in the United States. One other challenge, I don't think it was mentioned in the chat, but a lot of people struggle because their family is not willing or doesn't really understand why they even want to learn about their family history. And so they are reluctant to share any possible information that they might have about where the family comes from, or why they left China, or what were some of the struggles that they faced when they first arrived in North America. So these are, in combination, these are the reasons behind us developing this database, to empower people to go beyond these brick walls. And we do this by providing different kinds of tools to get them started. Now, in order for you to get started, what we always tell people before they start any search is ask themselves the question that I just asked you. What do you really want to find out? What would you most like to discover, not just in this talk, but in general? Who are you most interested in, and what would you like to find out about them? Then once you've identified what you want to focus on, start gathering names of that person, of their family members. But because we're talking about Chinese ancestors, you want to try and gather names in both English and Chinese, even if you don't understand those names in Chinese. And the same goes for places, places of birth of your ancestors who maybe were born in China and then moved abroad. This is definitely a big challenge as well, the birthplace. I think it was Jeannie who wrote she knows the county of birth of her family. So the big challenge here is trying to find the village that your family is from. Okay. I'm going to move on now. Oh, I'm so happy but overwhelmed by all of the really nice messages by people who've either visited my channel roots before or worked with us. Okay, so what resources are available on my channel roots? I'm going to share my other screen again so you can see. I believe one of our audience members mentioned they were struggling with their last name, getting beyond their last name. Now, understanding and knowing what your Chinese last name is, I would say, is probably step one in any search. If anyone is literally just starting out, then that is what I would recommend you do. So here you're looking at the homepage of the My China Roots library account database. Under resources in this top menu tab, you'll see we have some general resources to get you started. There is a genealogy wiki that we're constantly adding to. It has all sorts of articles that describe, how do you get started with Chinese family history research? What kind of records might you look for as you're getting started? And we also have a surname database. So this interface basically allows you to type in your surname in English. Let's say my ancestor, their surname was Chin, but I don't know how to spell it exactly. I've just heard a few stories about them. So using the database, I can learn that my Chin surname is related to a lot of similar Chinese surnames. And in fact, it can be the transcription of several possible Chinese surnames. So here there are a few clues I can use to identify the right one. Maybe I've heard my mom or my dad tell me that my surname is the name of an ancient state. And if my ancestors were Cantonese, spoke Cantonese, and they immigrated to United States, then I would assume this first one is probably a good guess. Now, if I click on this, sorry, the second one, as the first one is more common in Singapore and Malaysia. So I'll click on the second one to see what else I can find out about my surname. And here it has the Chinese spelling in simplified and traditional. It has the meaning. It has a bit about the legendary origins of surnames. So as opposed to other parts of the world, in China, what's interesting is that there are very few surnames for a large portion of the population. So the Chen surname, for example, is shared by many, many different people, but they each have very unique histories that have been well documented. So you can actually learn a lot simply about your surname without that much more information. The other things you can learn about on this page are what Chen or Qin family history records are available through the database. I can also see where Chens come from historically from Guangdong and Fujian province. So whether they were Cantonese or Hokkien. And this is another specificity about the My China Roots database, is we focus on people whose ancestors came from these two key provinces, because historically, especially from the mid 1800s onwards, that is where most Chinese people came from. So in the case of the US, most Chinese Americans to this day can trace their ancestry to Guangdong province, specifically the Xiyap, the four counties in Jiangmen. But as for Southeast Asia, you had a lot more people who would have come from Fujian province. I see that we have people who've joined from Malaysia and Singapore, which is really great to see. Yeah, I myself have Fujian ancestry, so not Cantonese. And so we've mapped basically the ancestral locations by surname, by clan, that I'll show you in a second. But at the bottom of this page, you can see different ways that the same surname can be pronounced by dialect and also by country. So wherever Chinese people went around the world, they probably needed to integrate and adapt to their local societies. And in places like Hawaii or Indonesia, there were very strong assimilationist, well, especially in Indonesia, there were strong assimilationist policies, which meant that ethnic Chinese people had to change their surnames to sound more Indonesian. I find this really fascinating. But essentially, what we're trying to do here is educate people about the possibilities and also show them that, in fact, there's no direct translation from Chinese to English. It could have been done in many different ways. And also, if you look at Peru or other Spanish-speaking countries, surnames may have been spelled, by Spanish-speaking immigration officials. And the way you spell names pronounced in Cantonese or Hokkien may differ from a native English speaker. So my first tip when you're researching Chinese ancestors, whether it's through the My China Roots database or elsewhere, is don't be surprised if your ancestors' names are spelled in different ways. It's very probable that they spell their names in different ways on different documents. So this is the surname database, the first resource that I recommend you check out. The second resource is our village database. So a lot of people get stuck trying to find the village or the place that their family is from for various reasons. Sometimes they only know a very generic area like Huiping, which is one of the 5 counties that a lot of Chinese Americans come from. But if you type in Huiping in Google Maps, you won't get any results because this is Kaiping City. Google Maps uses Mandarin Chinese, but the people who left Huiping, they didn't speak Mandarin. They probably spoke Hoisanwa or Cantonese. So they would have said their birthplace in that accent, which is Huiping. So that's why we designed this village database, to gather different spellings and historical names and pronunciations of places that a lot of Chinese immigrants historically came from. The other reason for this is that people don't quite realize how big China is. So even if you know that your family is from Huiping, it's quite a big city, and you're probably going to need to narrow down your search even more if you are keen to find more records of your Chinese ancestors. So that's what we do on these pages. We provide some context. We show people where Chinese people from this area migrated to. We'll show it to you on a map. And we will also list how many family tree books are available for this area, and what are the sub-districts or towns or villages that are inside this region. So the idea here is to encourage people to narrow down their search down to their village as much as possible. But I'll talk more about this a little bit later. Now I'm going to show you how you actually search the database and the collections. So this is very similar to ancestry.com, in that you can search for a name. It's pretty basic. So let's imagine my grandparent, my imaginary grandparent, ran a laundry business in Boston. Um, his name was Bok Sui Chin, so same surname that we were looking at. I don't know very much about him, except that he ran this business in Boston for a while, but I know that the family moved um, around the US. So I'm going to type in his name. You can see that I'm searching in English, but I could also search for records in Chinese. And this is how we are different from many other family history platforms in that we support bilingual searches. And I've just typed in Boston to show you what kind of records I get. And I'm going to search. So I've got about 100 results. I, of course, have the option to add more advanced filters if I want to in my searches. But to tell you the truth, I prefer when I'm searching to not put too many filters and instead use the sidebar filters on the search page to narrow down my results. And this is for various reasons. I mean, for one, I know that my Chinese ancestors probably had different names at different times, so I don't want to restrict things too much. Also, I know my ancestor moved around a lot. My relatives might not agree on when he was born in the first place, so I don't want to restrict my results. Now, I can see that I have different types of records that have been found, and on the side here, I can filter by the type of record, right? So I have some alien case files, some very traditional documents that you can find, like census records, right? Census records are a great place to start. So we have subsets of the censuses spanning the 1880s to the 1940s, only of the people, sorry, who recorded their own race as Chinese. Now, the census is great because besides including things like birth dates and birthplaces, it also has family information. So you can follow an entire family through the census, and because it took place every 10 years, it really paints a picture of what people were up to and what they stated their occupation was, for example. So this is a good start. So the census comes from the National Archives. We partner with different organizations to get our data, including big libraries and archives throughout the US. Now, aside from the census, again, the other very typical resource that you might be looking for are passenger lists. So a passenger list will just list the record of arrival or departure of a person if they were maybe traveling to another part of the US, or if they were going back to China to visit family, for example. And these are great because you have to look a little bit closer for this, but usually they will have on a passenger list of people who are arriving at a US port. There is usually a second page where they're asked to fill in who their closest relative is, who were they living with, or who are they visiting, whether it's their mother, their father. So usually on the second page, you'll find a lot of extra information about a person's family situation. So here I can see, for example, this record of a Bok Sui Chin or Sui Chin, and he lists his mother's name, Li Shi. Now, I believe there was a comment about women. Yes, Kimberly Moy asks, I've heard that many women in past generations didn't have formal names. So it's not necessarily that they didn't have formal names. Well, they may have had nicknames for sure and first names, but on a lot of documents, they would only have been recorded by their maiden names. So in this example, you see this person's mother is listed as Li Shi. So you'll see a lot of women who have this name this word she as part of their name. And this is not actually a name. It's just a word that stands for maiden name. So Li Shi literally means of the maiden name Li. It's just unfortunate that, yes, traditionally, women were not considered valuable or important enough to be known by an actual first name. And this happened both back in China, in Chinese documents, and also um, in US documentation after they arrived. This is why it can be challenging to look for female ancestors, or you have to do it via their relatives, via their husband, via their children. It's not impossible though. We've done a lot of research for people and we thought we didn't really have that much to go by for their female ancestors, but all you need is one document that lists a different name, an alternative name, and that unlocks a lot of new potential. Yeah, so my advice is keep trying, and keep asking your relatives if they were known as any other names. Okay, so going back to my list of results, the other types of documents that are quite special and that we prioritize on our database are exclusion records, so Chinese exclusion records. The types of records that we have here are, for example, exclusion books. So as I'm sure a lot of you know, in the US and in fact in other parts of the world too, in Canada also, in Australia, in Mexico, even in Peru, there have been at different points in history times when governments heavily restricted or forbade Chinese immigration into the country. And in the US, it lasted a very, very long time. And during the exclusion period, any Chinese person who was trying to enter the country needed to prove that they were allowed to do so. And there were only a few most people were not allowed into the country, and there were only a few exceptions to that rule. The exception was, for example, if you were a merchant or if you were a native, if you had been born there. So I'm just going to show you an example of what these records would be to police and to enact the Chinese exclusion. So in a lot of the key ports of the US, you can find the key ports where Chinese people would arrive. You can find these Chinese exclusion books that record basically all Chinese arrivals, what they stated their class to be, their status. So why are they allowed into the country? You'll see that this particular page lists Section 6 students. So that was the other exemption. If you were a student coming to the US to study, you were allowed in. If you were a laborer or a merchant or a native born, you were allowed in. So this is the case of this Chin Bok Sui, who is residing in Boston. And so he would have had to provide some kind of documentation to prove that he was native born. So we have several of these exclusion books for North Dakota, Washington, California. But no matter where these people were living at the time, they could have entered it via different ports. So that's one type of exclusion record that we have on the database that is worth checking out. The other exclusion record, and again, this is primarily for the US, but I'll move on to other countries a little bit later, are immigration case files. So whenever a Chinese person needed to leave the country and come back, perhaps, or if it was their first time coming, they needed to submit an application in which they proved that they were allowed into the country. And this application, all of the paperwork that they would have submitted for this application went into their case file. So here I have some 70 case files of potentially a Bok Sui Chin. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it was very common for Chinese ancestors to use more than one name, or to shorten their name, or to use an alias on different documents, which is why in our database we'll include partial matches as well, because it's very, very easy for people to just assume there are no records just because there's no exact match. So here I'm looking at results for immigration case files. This first one is from Boston, so I'm just going to take a look at that one. And case files are a fantastic resource. They're really, really valuable. They haven't all been scanned by the National Archives. So if they haven't, you can apply for it directly at the National Archives. But if it has been scanned, you'll be able to see it on the platform. And the reason they're so rich, some of them can be dozens of pages long, and they can include, so this is a Form 430, I believe. Yeah, which is basically an application that American-born Chinese would submit to basically state who they are, where they were born, and that they were allowed to travel. And these are great because they'll have photographs and sometimes even a Chinese signature and address. And indeed, this states his address in Boston, Massachusetts. The other things you can find in immigration case files are letters that are exchanged between the applicant and the immigration officials, sometimes the immigration commissioner in that local area. But of most value, I would say, are the interview transcripts. So perhaps some of you have already seen or applied for your own ancestor case file, but these are a fantastic source of information because a lot of these were translated into English or just took place in English, but there'll be very detailed questions about where the person is living, what is their occupation, how many family members do they have, how many times they've come back and forth between the US and China. I don't know, what does their village back home look like, and things like that. And you'll see on this particular interview, Chin Bok Sui writes that he has two names. He has a given name, Chin Bok Sui, and he has a marriage name, Fun Chun. And this again is very specific to researching Chinese ancestors. We're not even talking about different spellings of the same name, but aliases. So this is quite common. Traditionally, Chinese men could have as many as 5 different names, completely different names that were used at different milestone points in their life. So they may have had a birth name or a milk name, a given name, a marriage name, a posthumous name, a more formal courtesy name. So these will be used in different contexts and will be listed on different types of records. So again, this is something important to keep in mind when you are doing this research. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, yes, where possible, we try to index these alternative names. So if I had typed in Fun Chun, this result would also have come up in my search. So there are a lot of results for other people who are just called Chin Sui, so a shortened version of the name. But actually, what I'm going to do is remove this Boston filter because what was quite typical, and if I remember correctly, happens here also, was that one person could have multiple case files. In fact, especially if they lived in different places, if they moved around, if they entered via a different port compared to the previous time, you may find a case file in an entirely different part of the United States. So here I've removed my Boston, Massachusetts filter. And whereas before I think I had about 70 immigration case files, let me just, yeah, 70 immigration case files. Now I have almost 200 of them. Now they're not all going to be relevant, but there are some new ones that have appeared for Bok Sui Chin. One of these is in Philadelphia. If I look at this one and open it, this one, if I remember, is of the same person, and I know this because there is a photograph. If I can find it. Or maybe not this one, it's the other one. Bear with me. It's this one that is also indexed in Chinese. So this is an immigration case file that is from Philadelphia, not Boston this time. But I know that it's of the same person because there is a photograph of not just him, but also his wife and child. So this is another tip that I want to give you if you're researching Chinese American ancestors, is to keep your search broad. It was very typical for Chinese people to move around quite a lot after first arriving into the US. And the other thing you'll notice that we do that is different on our platform compared to others is we'll also index Chinese names and signatures where we can. And this is something we're doing gradually because we have a lot of materials that we've obtained from the National Archives. And so we're updating them and improving them, so to speak. You'll see that the surname here, Chin, is highlighted. If I click on it, it should open the corresponding surname page on the database. So you can see what it means, how it's pronounced. Again, learn about the history. So there you go. Now, the last type of sources that I want to show you that are quite valuable and quite unique to Chinese family history research are going to be our directory collections. So we don't have any directories for Boston yet. We have a few from California and the Mississippi Delta, I think. But so wherever they went, Chinese people congregated in their own communities, and it was typical for them to create their own business directories, sometimes even telephone directories. Again, these are great because they'll be bilingual in Chinese and in English, which unlocks a lot of potential resources in Chinese. The final type of document that I want to highlight are burial records and specifically tombstones. Now, this example that I'm going to click on is definitely not relevant to the Boxway character that I've chosen for my example, because the surname, well, it's of a Lim Sui Chin. It's the same surname, but the name is quite different. And this person was buried in the Hoi San Memorial Cemetery, which is in South San Francisco. So it's not relevant. It's unlikely that this is the same person. But I just wanted to illustrate that Chinese tombstones are among the most valuable type of clue that you might look for. Even if we don't have your ancestors' tombstone on our database, I always recommend our users to go look for and visit the graves of their family, because gravestones contain a lot of family history information. It may seem like there's not much if you just look at the English, but there's a lot that is inscribed in Chinese. On this one, for example, you have the person's full Chinese name. You also have their birthplace in China. And again, we've linked it to the closest possible location we could find on our place database. And on some tombstones, you'll have not just one name, but the multiple aliases of the same person, which are super useful. You'll also have sometimes family trees on the tombstone. So you'll have the name of the wife, the children, the grandchildren. This, in fact, is more common in parts of Southeast Asia. So whenever we have a record that has a Chinese name on it, there's something else that we do automatically, which is we take that name and we search for it in our collection of Chinese family tree books. So I just want to pause here for a second and come back to my slides. And the reason I want to just pause is because I want to talk about how you would traditionally go about finding your roots if you were interested in going back to China and just finding records that go beyond the time that your family left China. So what's interesting is that when you're doing genealogy research in China, the approach is very, very different to doing it in the West. You can't just go on a database, well, aside from my China roots, you can't find easily birth records, marriage records, death records that were officially kept by the government or anything like that. Birth certificates only became compulsory statewide in mainland China in the 90s. So prior to that, it was quite ad hoc what kind of official documents you might find. Instead, the general approach, the technique for finding information about your family is to start in your ancestral village. So what do we mean by ancestral village? We mean the place that your surname group, that your family was living in, usually before they left they left China. And because China was an agrarian society for a very long time, it's typical for people to have lived in the same village for centuries. In in my family's case, for example, my surname is Yap. It's a Chinese Hokkien surname. And in Fujian near Quanzhou, there is a Yap village, which is where my great grandfather came from. And our family or his ancestors were living there for at least 300 years. In some cases, some families have been living there longer. But as a result, in my Yap village, firstly, the name, my surname is the same as the name of the village. Also, I have many distant relatives who still live in Yap village. And in the village, there are several memorials to our family. There are two Yap clan halls or temples that are kind of used as social spaces, but they also have commemorative tablets that list the history of our surname, and ancestral worship tablets with names inscribed of ancestors. There's also the house that my great grandfather grew up in. There's an ancestral graveyard where all of our ancestors are buried in that village. There are, of course, older villagers who remember stories about my great grandfather and who I was able to speak to when I went back. And most importantly, there is a family tree book that has been compiled by one of the older villagers. And it's quite typical in many villages in Southeast China for these books to be kept and updated by the local community. They're by no means official documents, even though sometimes some families spend a lot of money to do it right, to do all the research, to publish it nice, to have multiple updates to each edition and things like that. So these family tree books, they are the holy grail when you're doing this kind of research because they can go back hundreds of years. So they contain thousands of names and they will list all of the relationships, generation by generation. Sometimes they'll have detailed biographies and birth dates and death dates, even when people moved abroad. So this is the most important thing that we would look for. And all of these traces that I've described, these are things that traditionally the My China Roots team would look for if a family was to hire us for research assistance. These are all the things that we would try to locate. But so if you were interested in finding your book yourself, in let's say a few years ago from now, you would have to go through several stages, right? You would need to first locate your village. So where is it exactly in China? You may have a rough name, but how do you locate it? And how do you make contact with people there, especially if you don't speak Chinese? You would need to find someone who speaks Chinese or speaks your dialect. Then you would need to find the phone number of someone who lives in that village, then reach out to them, talk to them, ask them if there is a jiapu or family tree book. Maybe they remember things about your family. And they might say, yes, we have some stuff, you should come over. So then you need to travel there or you need to send a My China Roots researcher there. Then when you're there, you can ask questions. You'll probably want to scan the book, take pictures, and ask loads of questions to your older relatives. And then you'll need to process all of these findings. So it's a lot of work just for finding your family tree book, which is exactly why we tried to incorporate into our database our family tree book collection, which even though it's only accessible in Chinese, even if you do have a Chinese name, this saves you so much effort and time and money to be able to search for a name directly via the database. So as I was saying, whenever you come across a record on the My China Roots website, if there is a Chinese name, you can scroll down to the bottom of this page and there will be a link to available records that match this name in the family tree database. So if I click view potential records of this person, it will search for full text matches. So our family tree book collection is quite large and we have yet to index it all by hand. In the meantime, you can search for it using our full text search, which is basically like a keyword search, which is still quite effective, but bear in mind that OCR is not 100% accurate. So what I'm looking at now are all of the instances where this name of this Lim Sui person has appeared in a family tree book. So these are all Chin books of the same clan, but they are from very different areas. What I would want to do at this stage is probably identify or filter down the area that I know my family is from, um, and then check through the results to see if there is a match, if the names match and the situation of the person described matches my ancestor. So at this stage, I'm just going to show you some examples of these books so you know what they look like. So here is a Qin family from Ningbo, which is not at all Guangdong province, but I like the look of this book. So I'll click on it so you can see what it looks like. In the left-hand side, highlighted in yellow, are all of the instances where this name has appeared in the book. It's also highlighted on the page. So bear in mind, I haven't typed in any Chinese. I've just been clicking on links. And inside the viewer, we have a built-in Chinese-English dictionary so that you can hover over characters and see what's going on. You'll see that this is quite a modern publication, and it's laid out in a typical family tree format. Now, what's interesting here at the top of the page, you see this section that's in bold. Now, what it says here, I'm going to try and use the dictionary to show you. It says 2, 10, 6. So this is Chinese for 26. 2, 10, 6, 26. And then shi, which means generation. So the people listed under here are of the 26th generation, which means that hypothetically, if this is my ancestor's name, if the information about this person's brothers match, if the information about this person's father matches my tree, excuse me, then I can potentially identify up to 25 generations of my ancestors just with this book alone. So I can make my way back through the book one by one until there are no more generations to identify. And this is why genealogy books or zupu are so powerful. They give you so much in one go, but you just need to know where to look and how to navigate them. So I would love to hear from, I think it was Eric who used our database and was able to find his family tree book. I would love to know, what you did next with it, whether you were able to find some stuff out by yourself, or if you asked some relatives for help making your way through the book. But yeah, these are fantastic resources. And if you come across a book that seems interesting, potentially relevant, I recommend you definitely browse through more of the pages, because some of them can contain a lot of additional contextual information about the family, such as the situation of the village, the history of the village, what kind of temples are there commemorating the family, who are the famous ancestors. Also, you might find portraits or biographies. Some of these books will also even include instructions on ritual practices for the various celebrations that take place throughout the year. So they're really fascinating records. If you do happen to have your own and you want a more substantial translation done by professionals, you can also contact our team at mychinaroots.com. That's another thing that we provide as a sort of more bespoke service. Okay, we are 5 minutes from the end, so I think this is almost time to wrap up. So the last thing I want to show you is searching for more generic sources. So on the homepage, you can see underneath the search bar the different categories of records that we have available. If you're just generally interested, the other thing you can do, rather than searching for a specific person by name, you can also browse our sources. Let's say, for example, let's say, for example, I think there was a question about Jamaican resources. Let's say you want to know what kind of Jamaica sources we have. You can filter by this place, and you'll be able to see what sources are available, whether they are indexed or not. And actually, these Chinese and Jamaica directories are a fantastic resource. I love them so much. Even though they don't contain that many records, they are fantastic because they have things like photographs, um, biographies, not just in Chinese, but also in English, names of businesses, addresses, family situation, mini family trees, so to speak. Um, yeah, so we have a few Jamaica resources for the person who was interested in that. For Southeast Asia, I know um, there were some comments about Malaysia and Singapore. We have mostly burial records from these places. So if I just click here to view all of the sources that we have here, we have a small selection of obituaries from Malaysian newspapers, and we have tombstones from two very large and historic Singapore cemeteries. Bukit Brown is one of the oldest Chinese cemeteries outside of China. It's quite ancient and it's huge, it's massive. And the graves, what is interesting with Southeast Asian tombstones is that aesthetically they look very different from North American gravestones. Let's see if I can find a good example. Yeah, there'll be a mix of English and Chinese, sort of more romantic kind of inscriptions almost. This one in particular seems to have the full family tree on the side, this white chalky section. Lists the sons, the daughters, the grandsons and granddaughters of this couple that is buried here. So yeah, please do check out the resources, whether it's through the Boston Public Library or not. I'll be happy to take any questions if you have any now. And just remember that, sorry, I'm looking for my screen. Just remember you, oh, if you do, if you do want your library to subscribe, but it's not on the list of libraries that currently subscribe, do shoot me an email, clotilde@mychannelroots.com. I realize that searching for Chinese ancestors can be very overwhelming, and I've gone through a lot of different scenarios and edge cases during my talk. It is indeed challenging, and you have to keep so many variables in mind, which is also why we created an individual subscription so that you can basically build your tree and forget about it. We make it super easy. You build your tree and wait for the notifications to come in. So we basically do the searching for you. If you are interested in that, then don't forget about our special discount that is running throughout the month of May. And that's it. Thanks for joining us today. I think I have still a lot of comments that I have to catch up
Yes,
on in the
thank
chat.
you. Yes, we do have a few questions.
Okay.
So
Which should
Stephen
I
was
start with?
asking, is there a record of Chinese immigrants arriving in Penang in the late 1800s?
In Malaysia. So we don't have any passenger records for Malaysia, unfortunately. In fact, um, I have yet to see in Malaysia, at least from the Malaysia side, I've yet to see arrival documents of people coming from China into Malaysia. I've looked for them myself when I was at the National Archives in Malaysia, and the archivist was unable to even tell me whether it existed. I'm sure it exists, but they're just not accessible, unfortunately. If you do have ancestors in Penang, though, and you know your surname, perhaps it's one of the key surnames. Penang is one of the old prominent Chinese enclaves of Malaysia. So I would recommend reaching out to one of the clan associations, because they will have a lot of records of people. For that, you will need your ancestor's name, though, ideally in Chinese. If you can find your ancestor's gravestone, you could bring that with you when you reach out, or you could include that in your communications with the clan association.
Okay, let's see. We have something from Tina.
Mm-hmm.
She's in Brisbane and is researching or trying to locate her grandfather who was in Samoa in the 1930s as an indentured laborer. We had no clue where he was from except the region they were recruited from and a Chinese cousin we had been DNA matched with. I believe her grandparents are a close relative to my grandfather, and I have their village details.
Oh, amazing. Well, so is the question about what to do next? Or, I mean, that sounds really exciting that you've matched.
That's, or maybe they're just wanting to say that. I'm not sure. If you do have a question, please let us know.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. It's fantastic that you were able to match with this person. If they are a close cousin, um, of yours, or if that person whose village, is a
Yes, they
cousin.
want to know what
Yeah.
to do next.
Okay, well, it sounds like you might want to visit the village if you are interested in finding out more about where they were from and what might have pushed them to leave. Usually, making contact with the village would be a really, I think, valuable and rewarding experience. Um, Maybe even taking a trip there. But that is the best thing for really getting a sense of um, the place and the people, what they were doing around there. Um, yeah, if you know where in China this village is, please feel free to share, and maybe I can tell you some more, or recommend a place to start.
Okay. And,
Yeah.
Suzanne says, my mother's father immigrated to Cuba in the 40s and 50s. Is there a way to track?
Oh, immigrated to Cuba or from Cuba?
They are saying. Let me backtrack here. They're saying to Cuba.
Oh, okay, interesting. Um, and I assume the this ancestor is Chinese. We do actually have some Cuban Chinese resources, but these are not available to the public. They are just for sort of um, only we don't have permission to publish them essentially, but they are association records of the main Chinese. It was called the casino, but actually it's the main Chinese association. It's not a casino. That is just what they called it for the Chinese community of different cities in Cuba. So if you are interested and you have a name of this person's mother who went back to Cuba, then shoot me an email at clotildiap@mychannelroots.com. I can check that source for you and let you know if we have any records of this person. Just send me the name, where you think in Cuba they were based, and I'll just take a quick look for you and see if there's anything there. The Chinese community in Cuba is also a very ancient one. Um, Unfortunately, the Chinese population has dwindled and in the last 50 years, but they have a huge Chinese cemetery in Havana that is just really beautiful, but kind of in a haunting way. So there are definitely records available for doing Chinese Cuban research, but it's just not very accessible at the moment. I see there's a question on Chinese records for Hawaii. Yes, we do have records of Chinese in Hawaii. So Roy, who asked this question, same thing. If you go back to the database and go to the main search page, if you click under sources and type in Hawaii, then you'll be able to see all of the collections that we have that are relevant to Hawaii. I'm constantly, sorry, short tangent. As Jesse said in the intro, my job with My Channel Roots is not just doing these presentations, but also doing research to find new collections of new historical collections of Chinese people around the world, whether that's family tree books or immigration documents or directories. So if you have a resource that you think would be really helpful, then please do let me know. I'm always on the hunt for these kinds of things. Whatever is useful to as many people as possible really is my goal. Okay.
Let's see. So Joyce is asking, my father emigrated from China to Suriname, South America before 1930. I know
Mm.
his birth village. Can I find documents like birth records and immigration information?
Not on the Chinese side. So it's great that you have his birth village, but what you most likely to find if you do want to go back to China, as I mentioned earlier, is you're not going to be able to find a birth certificate of this person in China. You're not going to be able to find a travel document that says when he left. I assume if you have ancestors in Suriname, you already found the Suriname Indentured Laborers database, which is available through the Suriname National Archives website. But yeah, aside from that, I can't think of any kind of traditional official document you might be able to find for this particular person, unless you go back to China and then to the village itself. And then you might be able to connect with relatives who can share stories, who might have a family tree book of this ancestor. But for this, you would need to know his Chinese name to be able to match him in the book.
So Kathy is asking, how have you gathered the family books trees from China? I think we have a couple people interested in
Oh,
knowing how you
yeah,
got those in.
great question. So these family tree books from different places. We collaborate with local libraries, but also there are a lot of private collectors throughout China who just collect these books and scan them. So we've purchased these copies from either libraries or collectors. So it depends. And there is maybe a very small handful that we gained permission from the villages that we visited, during our various research trips. We got their permission to scan it and publish it, basically. So that's where they come from. On the topic of family tree books, earlier on in my presentation, I said that we focus primarily on two main provinces, so Guangdong and Fujian, where most overseas Chinese people historically come from. But when it comes to family tree books, we actually do have quite a varied collection of books available from different from different regions in China, not just Guangdong and Fujian. So if you do have ancestry from another province, whether it's a northern province or Hainan, or yeah, it's worth checking out as well. I think this is more relevant if you're maybe from Southeast Asia, and Chinese people in these parts, they came from different areas, not just the two that I mentioned. Yeah, what other questions were there?
Okay, let me
Still catching
see.
up.
Yes, we're still catching up. Okay, so Kathy was also wondering where in California are there other libraries that have my China roots?
Oh, yes. So Kathy, let me just bring up my earlier slide. We're currently available at the San Francisco Public Library, the Los Angeles, oh, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. The Alameda County Public Library, Los Angeles Public Library, also UC Berkeley and Stanford. So if you went, you don't need to be a Berkeley student or a Stanford student or faculty member. You can just go, if you are on campus and you visit mychinarootslibrary.com, you will have access to the database. And same thing with the other libraries. Yeah. If you don't live in any of these areas, again, do just shoot me an email and tell me what is your local library. Usually libraries, they love to hear from the community. So you can also email them yourself and say like, hey, I would really love to use this resource. Can you please subscribe? And then, yeah, and then that just also helps me when I reach out to them if they've already heard about the product and they know that people are interested.
Right, and she just posted her daughter lives in San Francisco, so
Oh, wonderful.
she's all set
Easy,
there.
easy. Yeah.
Right. So Sue Lynn is asking if we have an image of a Chinese name, how is that entered in the database from an English keyboard?
Okay, this is more challenging. We don't have an easy way right now to convert image to text. It is definitely a feature that we're thinking about working on because of this case that Sulin just mentioned. Right now, the only way you would do it is ask a friend who can type in Chinese to type the name for you, and then you can copy paste it into your search bar as needed. Yeah, but it's a great question. It is definitely a place that a lot of people are getting stuck on.
All right. So Carol is asking if I add all my family tree to the China Roots Library, is it private to me or published for all to see?
Also an excellent question. So just to clarify, your family tree account, or your family tree, you cannot build it through your library account. The library does not let its users build their own family trees. To build your own family tree, you would need to create your own personal account through mychinaroots.com, and you pay a subscription for that. But your family tree will always be private unless you decide to share it with your friends or your relatives. It will always be private, only to you. No one has access to it. No one can search it. Um, yeah, you know, that's not something that anyone wants. And from our end, we would never publish your data. We would never sell it to anyone. That's something that I'm worried about as well. um, yeah. And the last thing I wanted to say, yes, the way that the hints work for your family tree, and by hints, I mean notifications. So this is all automated. If you were to build your family tree with My China Roots, you would get these notifications when there is a match. This is all done automatically. So it's not a real person looking at your tree and searching for the records. It's just based on the information you've inputted and very detailed sets of logic that we've designed to filter out what we think is relevant and not relevant. So even when you get those emails, those notification emails that tell you you've got a match, this is still all very private to you. No one else has seen your tree at this stage. I hope that answers your question.
So we just have a couple more. I don't want to keep you too
Mhm.
long. So Kim is asking, how do you find your ancestral village on a map?
Mm. So if you use the My China Roots Village database, there is a map integration on it. So you can visualize where it is, but you need a name to start with. So I don't know if your question is because you've had it pointed out to you on a map and you're trying to find it now based on the map. Perhaps you can clarify if you're happy to share the place, then maybe we can go through it together.
Okay, so Kimberly is asking if a record is shown as belonging to the National Archives but not available online,
Hmm.
should we just email the branch of the National Archives where the document is kept and ask that it be scanned?
Yes, you can do this. That's exactly why we have the link. So a lot of immigration case files, exclusion case files that are held at the National Archives for various reasons have not all been scanned. Sometimes it's due to privacy concerns. They don't want to just put personal information out there. Um, so yes, if it is a case file, you definitely want to apply for it. So if you just click the link open in partner site on the database, then it will take you to that exact record page. And there should be a section at the bottom of the National Archives page. Maybe I can just show you so it's easier. Um, how it works. Let's take one of these. Yes, and you can normally just, this is a case file, which is technically not, sorry, this is an alien case file, but yeah, the alien file, so these are what came after the exclusion case files. Um, so as you can see, this one is not scanned because it's potentially restricted. So to apply for it, there is normally, right, contact information right here. So you'll want to email the archivist, include the link to this file. They may ask you for some further information, like whether you're related to the person or not, but not always. And then hopefully they can scan it for you. If you do need scanning assistance at a particular branch and you don't have anyone to go there, just you can shoot us a message as well, because sometimes we have colleagues or partners that we work with who are based in different cities in the US who can help with this. So yeah, good luck. Good on you for finding the case file. That is great.
Okay. So Roy is asking, my copy of my Zupu only goes back to 1832. Is there a
Mm.
way to find records in previous years?
Yes, there is. Sometimes you can find a connecting zupu or a zupu that covers a larger regional area. So what you'll need for this is first know, I mean, you should know if you already have your zupu, but um, see if there are other family tree books for the similar region as the one where your book is from. And also you'll need to know the earliest ancestor in your lineage from your zupu that you have, the one that goes back to 1830. You can search for that name in other family tree books and see if the lineage connects. One thing to note about family tree books is the further back in time you go, the less historically accurate they tend to be. Because remember that these books were created originally to make people feel more connected to their clan and basically be more not patriotic, but I guess uh engage more with matters within their family and feel more proud also of being part of the same family. So the further back in time you go, the more these books tend to connect lineages to very famous people. And sometimes you just have to take it with a pretty big pinch of salt. But usually up to about the 1600s, it's pretty reliable.
Okay, so let me see. So this is related to an earlier question that Kim was asking. I think you asked about the village name. It said, I only know the name. It was called Dai Tong Village in Yenping in 1912. I looked up on Google and did a bit of searching in MCR, but could not locate it. Not sure if it
Mm.
still exists.
Dai Tong. Well, that sounds like some sort of Cantonese pronunciation. And it could be that it is just known under a different name. Indeed, a lot of places changed name. Let me just check if I can find it. But you said it was in Enping, and it was called Dai something.
Dai Tong.
Okay. Um, Dai Tong. Okay, no match. So I'm just gonna click on the NPing page and see if there's anything obvious there. So at the bottom of the NPing page, I can see all of the different towns within Ping. And I'm just seeing if there's one that sounds kind of like Daitong. There's Da Tian, but I think in Cantonese that would probably be pronounced Da Tin or Tai Tin. Okay, so that's not it. Um, I'm just checking if there's anything else. So it could be a very small village within these areas. Um, yeah, Dai Tong. What I would suggest in that case is you will probably need a little bit more assistance. So there are other resources that are available, but they're Chinese language resources like gazetteers that our researchers can help you check to see if maybe there used to be a village called Daitong, but now it's been renamed something else. So you can definitely contact us if you're stuck and you can't find it on the map yet. Um, yeah, I would need to do some more research also.
Okay, so
Unfortunately,
finally,
no, I was just going to say, unfortunately, we don't have every single possible spelling that some of these places were known as. So we may still have it, but it's just not spelled in this way or yeah.
Carol's asking, what's the difference between, I'm assuming them at Zupu and Jiapu?
Oh, also good question. There isn't really a difference. They're just different names for the same thing. Jiapu with Jia literally means family book, whereas Zupu, the Zu bit, ZU, means clan book. But for the purposes of this, I mean, there's no difference in terms of scope and size. They're basically interchangeable. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's it. If we didn't get to your question or if you think of something later, Clotilde shared her contact information up above, and you can also send us an email. There you go. And thank you, Clotilde. This was a wonderful presentation, and
Thanks,
um,
Jeffrey, for having me.
this is
Always fun.
great to see you. And thank you everyone for joining us at such an odd time. I hope everyone is having a good week and you have a good weekend coming up. And I hope to see you at our next lecture, which will be on June 13th, called DNA in Your Family Tree. So just a couple of more reminders. This was recorded. Everyone will be getting a link once it's ready, and you'll also be getting a reminder email, wrap-up email from me tomorrow with the chat transcript. So if you missed something from the chat, you'll be able to get it there. Right. Thank you everyone for coming, and have a good afternoon. And have a good
Thanks,
evening,
everybody.
adult.
Thanks. Take care.